Hello, everyone. Many of the essays that we'll be reading this course are what I would call mind openers. That is, they take an innovative or unconventional point of view and provide such convincing evidence that we're forced to reconsider what we had previously thought on a topic. Charles Murray says that too many people are going to college. That is not a popular position today. At the end of his essay, Murray talks about the stigma associated with not having a college degree. So Murray has a lot of they says to overcome. First of all, he agrees that everyone needs a core knowledge of facts. It's interesting if you look at the lists of things that he thinks everyone should know. How many of them are you familiar with? Did you give yourself that little quiz? For example, do you know what a smoke-filled room refers to? Do you know who Falstaff was? Who Duke Ellington was? Murray says we need to be familiar with a body of core knowledge to participate in society. And he says that kindergarten through 8th grade is the right place to do it. It's interesting, the educational system, I would say probably beginning in the 60s, shifted from an emphasis on memorization and learning facts to an emphasis on critical thinking. And it is kind of a pendulum that's swung, and I think is beginning to swing back a little bit, because what we wound up with was a generation that could think critically very well, but didn't have much to think about, because they didn't have necessarily that core body of knowledge. I know I so many times encountered, when I was teaching middle school, students who I thought would make outstanding lawyers someday because they argued so well and so forcefully. But they didn't have the facts to back up the argument because they hadn't learned them. So that was a major change in the way teachers taught and the way students learned. So, Murray says, as I say, the place to teach this core body of knowledge is in the elementary grades. And that's a position that I know a number of you share because I learned this in the discussion. At the college level, Murray says, a liberal arts curriculum is tough. He gives an interesting example of a student at the 98th percentile of ability, and then compares her with a student at the 80th percentile of ability. Should both students go to college? His answer is that the decision has a lot to do with the student's own desires, abilities, and goals. He does allude to the data of researchers like Owens and Saltill that conclusively prove that, on average, over a lifetime, people who possess a bachelor's degree will earn more than people who do not possess a bachelor's degree. But like Owens and Saltill, he also notes that this generalization does not apply in every case. He goes on to say that the bachelor's degree is essentially a no-cost screening device for academic ability and perseverance. He says, quote, employers do not value what the student learned, just the student has a degree, close quote. And here he gives an example of a person who is considering a career either as an electrician or as a manager. So how do you decide? Many of you may be in the same position. Should you do something that you want and like to do? Or should you do whatever will make you the most money? The example of the electrician/manager here is very enlightening because Murray said the person in this example will be a mediocre manager, but a very good electrician. And a very good electrician can make more money than a mediocre manager. Plus, get what Murray terms an intrinsic reward, which we would call happiness and job satisfaction. Murray closes his argument with a very strong criticism of counselors who urge all of their students to go to college straight after high school. He thinks they're doing a disservice. And he calls the fact that society has stigmatized not having a bachelor's degree the dark side of the bachelor's. I'd like you to pay special attention to the way that Murray concludes his essay. Many of us have difficulty writing conclusions. You may have been told that the conclusion should summarize your main points, and that certainly is one strategy, but not always the best strategy, and certainly not the only strategy. The problem with the summary conclusion is that it often is nothing more than a repetition of what you've already told the reader. However, Murray here summarizes with an interesting twist by asking you to imagine what seems to be an utterly dystopian society, an utterly dystopian educational system, but which is actually the system that we have in place. I hope you enjoyed the essay, and I hope that whether you agree or disagree with it, that you found it to be a mind opener.